Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hiro-san is well. She is in the Association of Soto Zen Buddhists meeting, and so she will be returning late tomorrow evening. You hear people describe meditation. I think one of the favorite things that I have heard people or someone say about meditation was that it's like going to that place where you remember what reality is. Which is strange that as human beings we must do this. But I do think we live in complexities that kind of exceed our ability to be with them. And so meditation is this grounding ourselves in our most basic, fundamental state. I think of us sometimes as like our own planets. And we sort of have our atmosphere around us that shrouds us in this mystery. And I think in my experience, I spent most of my life sort of in that mystery, sort of in my own atmosphere. And I think a lot of what the Zen practice is learning to go outside of that. I think what that atmosphere is to me, how I understand it, is that it is my own ideation, my own thoughts, my own words that I take as reality so much of the time. And so Zazen is like going past that, where we aren't hung up on the words or our conception of what reality is, but we let that kind of drop away. And if you use the metaphor of the planet, it's sort of like leaving your own atmosphere and going out into space. And I think that the height of Zen practice is to meet someone who is there as well, in that space. I think that this is possible, and this is the deepest expression of Zen, is when two people meet in this way. And so I think so much of this really comes down to our ability to communicate with one another, and how difficult that is. It's not obvious. I think we communicate in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different layers, but in this spiritually transcendent way where two people meet in this shared reality is rare and beautiful and worth striving for. And so everything we do in Zen is a form of meditation. And I think that this is a lot of the implicit wisdom of the tradition, is that to take this meditation practice out into the world is very difficult. And so we train that capacity in different ways to make it more likely. And so as we sit here, it might seem that I should say something of value, something that you might carry with you out into your tomorrow, something that you might consider or get some utility from. But I think in a more meaningful sense, what this time is about is really honing that capacity to be in the rawness of a moment. To sort of leave that orbit of words and thoughts and to go out into the unknown. And as I talk about the limits of words, I think in a sort of a true Zen form, I would like to read this. Forward by Neil Postman. I think this was a very influential book for me. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death. It was written in 1985, and as some of these things go, it just becomes more and more applicable as time goes on. But in this work, Neil Postman is making the argument that what we think of as our news medium, our medium of conveying information, is actually not about information in the way we might think it is, but it's sort of about entertainment, and actually not so great about gathering information. And so he wrote this short foreword, which, to my understanding, is the thing that he actually was most known for writing. And I would like to read it for you. It's comparing the works of 1984 and by George Orwell and Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. We were keeping our eye on 1984. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we, at least, had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression, but in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who would want to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumbly puppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and the rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Huxley added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we would hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. This book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right. So that word distraction is, I think, what I hone in on, and how that applies to our practice. I think in simpler times, maybe it would have been easier to keep our spiritual lives and our political lives more separate. But I think that this is a terribly difficult time to do that. And I think that many of us are overwhelmed by a volume of information that so much of is very difficult to handle. And I also wanted to just suggest that maybe so much of what is being reported in the news is actually itself a distraction, keeping people from addressing the more critical issues that are actually quite literally threatening human life, our will, by and by. I think Zen is very suited for this. This ability to see through the distraction. I think that's a lot of what we aim to do. To be useful. And this is so much of what Zen ethics hinges around, is that this idea of right and wrong, good and bad, really isn't quite as useful as we might think it is. But that to frame our activity and our aspirations around what is useful is actually, I think, a profoundly saner and more effective way of living. And so I wonder at how effective so much of what has become mainstream in our culture is useful for us. The level of information and the mediums by which we expose ourselves to them, I think we should have a lot of doubt around. And I think that this need to come to some place where we can remember what reality is not going away anytime soon. And so we aspire to sit daily for that daily reminder so that we can begin to have our lives more centered around being conscious and aware in a way that's useful, which hinges on everything else that we do. What information we expose her to, how much of everything. I hope you are all being kind to yourselves by viewing politics in a way that is useful to you. Maybe you have some questions.
Do you have any guidance in how you view politics in a way that is useful?
I hope that whatever I would say would come from the deepest sense of humility and uncertainty and doubt. I read something interesting today. It was that if you valued truth, or if you wanted to manifest truth into the world, don't take rationality so seriously. Which I think we're starting to see in a very compelling way, supported by deep and involved neuroscience, that what we believe and how we interact with the world really comes from our gut feelings. And we generate a rationality for those sort of ad hoc. And so I think this notion that we can sit down and rationalize with people about their beliefs and change those through reason alone is, I think, untenable. I think that takes a lot of pressure off. That we can't really convince people maybe in the way that we thought that we could convince them. But to engage the world and to change people's opinion is really to be with them and understand them, of what motivates them, what they value. What you might call that human connection is actually necessary as a precursor to changing the way people think. So I think a lot of what we do in politics doesn't really honor that so much. we aren't really having that argument. We're sort of just fighting without really trying to understand one another. We're trying to prove something or to succeed in making our agenda the one that gets passed. So I think when we bring it down to this realm where things are quite useful, they become more humane and warm and immediate and local. And I think that would be sort of my roundabout way of maybe suggesting how engaging politics would be of more benefit.
Thank you, Will. So my father used to have this strange habit of, I thought it was strange growing up, where he used to really like sports. So he would turn on the radio or check, I guess it was the radio most of the time, just to see what the score was. And then he would move on from his day. And I thought that was the strangest thing. But I think politics these days has become a lot like that. We all have our teams, which are wherever we are in the spectrum of politics, and we check into the news or we check our phones or whatever to see how our team is doing. And then we move on. It's kind of been reduced to something like that. And I think that's part of an unhealthy component of it.
And I think this kind of territoriality and tribalism is definitely a key fact of this. I think something that's also very interesting to me is that when we look at people who are open to what they don't know, that actually doesn't correlate with intelligence. For someone to be more intelligent doesn't make them more inclined to try to understand viewpoints that conflict with their own. It actually seems that kind of what usually happens is that people use intelligence to sort of defend and barricade their own beliefs and to kind of entrench their already arrived at thinking. But to have that fluidity, to see these things and to make this connection is to go beyond what you already know, which is priceless. To have that doubt, to wonder at these things, to question the obvious, is, I think, wonderful. I think that there are some significant cultural differences between how we are in the West and how people are in the East. And there's this saying in Confucianism that I've often thought about. It's a curse. It's a Confucian curse. But it's the saying that, may you be born in interesting times. And I've always kind of thought that I would rather be in interesting times. That's more suited to me. I wonder if that's a culturally shared sentiment. But these are definitely interesting times, and they are very difficult.
Don't you think it's possible to be two interesting times?
I suppose. Yes, definitely. There's balance in everything, which is the hard part. Maybe even more so for, people in modern American society. Balance seems to be
out the window.
One of my favorite humans has this, I think it came from Jerry Seinfeld, a skit that he gave. He said that the most American thing was to ask for the lethal dose, but to back it off just a little bit. I think that is definitely what we are inclined to do as a people.